and welcome to the Employee Safety Podcast from Alert Media, where you'll hear advice from experienced safety leaders on how to protect your people and your business. I'm Sarah Prattley, filling in for Peter. Today, I'm talking with Kurt McKenzie, Director of Physical Security for a major global tech organization, where he oversees security operations, compliance, and risk management. He's also a retired FBI supervisory special agent with more than 20 years of experience investigating financial crimes, terrorism, and organized crime, both domestically and abroad. Our conversation explores how Kurt's extensive law enforcement experience informs his strategies for detecting and avoiding disruptions to business operations. Let's hear what he has to say. Hi, Kurt. Thanks for being here.
Hi, good afternoon.
All right. You have such an impressive background. Let's go ahead and start there. Can you start by sharing a little bit about your career journey?
Sure. I actually came to the FBI in 1997 from the pharmaceutical industry. My background is in science and joined the FBI as a civilian scientist working in the FBI laboratory. I was a member of the DNA analysis unit. And in 2001, I left to go to Quantico to get a gun and grab bad guys. The FBI sent me to Miami, and I stayed there for the rest of my career. And I worked white-collar crime, some counterterrorism, organized crime, a little bit of drug trafficking, but mostly organized crime. As a matter of fact, I ended up retiring as the head of the Organized Crime and Major Theft Task Force for all of South Florida.
I can imagine there are a ton of things from your time in the public sector that you brought with you as you moved into the private sector. How did your time with the FBI influence your approach to managing physical security and risk now that you've joined the private sector?
So I'd say the FBI gave me a graduate level education in global security risks and taught me how to identify resources in order to address those risks. So it also helped me to put things into perspective with regards to addressing private sector security. In other words, how to assess the severity of a risk is a big deal in corporate America. How serious is this? Is somebody going to get hurt? And I think having spent as much time in the FBI as I did put me in a great position to be able to do that.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing transferable skill and something that I'm sure you're valuing these days as well from your past experience. So we talk a lot about the threat landscape throughout different parts of our organization, with a lot of our customers, with a lot of people across different spaces, events that are obviously trending. What are some of the emerging risks or trends you're seeing now that concern you the most?
So I'd say insider threat is my biggest concern, and specifically within that, hacktivism. In other words, employees who take it upon themselves because they're motivated by politics, religion, whatever. They take it upon themselves to do harm to the company, whether that's installing malware or actually hurting people. That is my biggest concern. And the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO triggered those concerns, sort of cemented that concern for me, because not only did this happen, but there appears to be a wave of people across the country who support this action. And I don't know where they are. Are they at my company? Are they at your company? So insider threat is my biggest concern.
When you think about insider threat, when you think about hacktivism, are there things that you would suggest or maybe things that you're doing now that would be good tips to kind of mitigate that sort of risk?
Yes. So I'm in the process of creating an insider threat program. I'm looking at who should be stakeholders within that program, because having a physical security team entirely run your insider threat program is not the best move. It's better if you have participation from your IT team, from your legal team, from your HR team. Everybody has a role to play in a properly functioning insider threat program. So right now, we're in discussions about setting that up at my company.
Yeah, it's a great tip. It makes sense to bring a lot of parts of the organization together, especially around such an important topic. Another important topic, something we talk a lot about, business travel. We're basically back to pre-pandemic travel levels. Folks are back on the road, traveling really all over the globe. Is travel security an area that you're focusing to?
Yes, it is. And actually, this is where Alert Media is a critical partner. As we expand out into certain areas of the world, it's important to educate the employees about the potential risks. Many employees, especially Americans, are not aware that the rest of the world is not as safe as their neighborhood here in Austin. So education is very important about the risks of kidnapping. I try to provide statistics to employees and to leadership about the dangers of kidnapping for ransom in certain parts of the world, namely South America, Southeast Asia. Obviously, the risk of street violence, depending on the country you're in, political upheaval. There are a whole host of risks that travelers face that they may not be aware of. So my job, in addition to protecting them, is to educate them.
Yeah, it feels like it's core, obviously, when you have people going to areas that they're not incredibly familiar with, like you said, to provide data to really help them understand that landscape, threatscape, any cultural sensitivities. So amazing to hear some of those different things that you and your teams are doing. You mentioned earlier some of the cross-functional support and some of the collaboration that it sounds like you're doing across your organization. You mentioned IT, you mentioned legal, HR. When you think about some of that cross-functional work, are those the most important partners? Are there other parts of the organization that trigger for you as well that you really need to build a deep partnership with?
Yeah, the first thing to point out is that I have a very small team. And unless you're talking about a very large company, most security teams in corporate America are going to be relatively small. So it's in your best interest to form partnerships within the company. It's a force multiplier. It helps you accomplish more. You can either direct other team members' actions or stakeholders' actions, or you can take their input and use that to your benefit. But larger teams and bigger companies don't have to worry about these issues, but smaller teams do, right? Working together is much more important for a smaller team. And one of my first tasks when I came to the private sector was to conduct a gap analysis. In other words, identify not only where our weaknesses are, but who the stakeholders were that I could reach out to for assistance. And IT and HR, as I mentioned before, and the legal team are critical partners.
I love that you mentioned the force multiplier concept. I think it's a great concept, especially for small teams. And it feels like very outside the box thinking too, for how to pull in other parts of your organization. Are there folks or groups or associations that you even think of outside of your organization when it comes to kind of strengthening the practice, strengthening what you're doing?
Yes, there are professional groups that I am aligned with, that I have memberships with. But more importantly, believe it or not, is the informal network. So as a retired FBI special agent, there are a number of FBI special agents retired who are in corporate security across the corporate landscape, the technology industry, banking, you name it. So many of us know each other. We're actually a small community, believe it or not, and we will reach out to each other for recommendations or just to share experiences. I use this vendor, they didn't work out that great. Or I use that vendor, they're very expensive, but I got what I needed. So their experiences and my experience that I share with them are invaluable.
Absolutely. I can imagine you guys talk a lot about what's happening around the globe and the world. Is there anything that sticks out to you in those conversations? I know you mentioned insider threat and hacktivism. Is there anything else that stands out that's really high topic of conversation?
Espionage. Espionage is the next biggest concern. Depending on the company you work for, it could actually be the primary concern. But if you're a company that creates some sort of proprietary product or service, you best believe you will be targeted for espionage by a foreign government, more likely than not a hostile foreign government. This sounds like a spy movie. People think I'm talking about a James Bond flick. That is not the case. This is true. It is happening every day. And corporate security leaders need to be aware of that and take steps to counter that. But yes, I would say espionage, whether it's foreign intelligence agencies or whether it's espionage committed by a competitor, it is a huge risk that I don't think enough companies are paying attention to.
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's something that I haven't heard in a lot of conversations at all. And it obviously sounds like something that people should certainly be taking into consideration. Changing gears a little bit, we love to hear how you might be doing your work, any great examples, any stories you can tell. Is there anything that you would bestow on us, any examples of times where you maybe felt particularly proud of how you identified something that the business was able to avoid, maybe a major disruption or something of that nature?
I won't talk in detail about that because technically I'd be potentially exposing a weakness, even if it's a weakness that we addressed. I don't want to talk too much about our weaknesses, but let's just say my approach to security is always to try to identify trends and risks and create procedures or acquire tools to address them before they can harm the company. I am always looking 2 steps ahead in order to secure the company's assets and, more importantly, to keep the people safe. So this has been successful on a few occasions in the last couple of years. I have had some successes, but again, I will keep that to myself because you don't want to let people who may not have our company's best interest at heart listening to me talk about our weaknesses.
All right. A hot topic for our listeners is always how to get leadership buy-in, how to partner there. So I wanted to ask you, do you have any tips on that? What's your approach for getting executive buy-in?
Yes, actually, this is something I've thought a lot about and I've put into practice myself. So I'd say there are three aspects to that. The first is there's a Japanese phrase, I believe it's called nemawashi, which means building consensus among stakeholders before you walk into a meeting. Second is having your elevator pitch ready at all times for anybody who's willing to listen and repeating that message often. And the third is to, I hate to say this, but never let a tragedy go to waste, meaning highlight security-related incidents at your company or elsewhere as a way to push for greater buy-in or funding in order to strengthen your security program. So all three of those work together. You're always spreading your message. You're dealing directly with your stakeholders so they understand your message. And then that way, as you deal with upper management, they've heard this message coming from everywhere. So this is not new to them. And repetition can help initiate action.
That's great. Obviously, a huge trifecta there that's really important. Executive buy-in is clearly a huge thing for all organizations. What about employee buy-in? Is there anything you would suggest there?
You can take some of the same pillars from what I just said. So in other words, if you have your elevator pitch ready for the employees, now obviously it's not something you're going to talk about in the hallway as you're walking by, but as you send out emails to the employees or as you send out Slack messages to the employees, however you communicate with your employees, make sure that you include your elevator pitch. It's important for them to hear the same thing over and over because it becomes real to them if they hear it often enough. And they're not dumb. They're seeing what's going on in the world. They will remember what you said. Oh, you know what? Kurt warned us about this. Kurt said something about this. Kurt had advice. Kurt had a tool. Kurt had a vendor to address these issues. But the more I repeat myself and the more they see what's going on, the two kind of meet in the middle.
Yeah, that communication, and it sounds like kind of normalizing that so people understand what they're hearing. They hear it very often.
Exactly. It's all about the messaging.
Definitely about the messaging. Well, as we start to wrap up here, any recommendations for our listeners on how to strengthen physical security programs?
So first is hire the best people for the job and delegate accordingly. You don't want to be in a position as a director or boss of having to do the day-to-day yourself. So make sure you have people you trust who can execute your vision. The second is build effective liaison with stakeholders. Again, I can't overemphasize how important that is, especially for a smaller team. You're going to need the help in order to spread your message and make your policies effective. And third is always look 2 steps ahead and use everything I just said to help you secure funding for your organization, for your team.
All right, last question, your opinion, number one skill or trait that can help a corporate security professional leader be successful in their role?
That is easy. It's communication, communication, communication. You have to effectively communicate your intentions, the reasons for your actions, your goals, and your needs to stakeholders and leadership, more importantly, in order to be successful.
I couldn't agree more. Communication is absolutely key. Kurt, thank you so much for being on the show, for taking the time today. You have incredible experience, both in the public sector, obviously with decades of experience there, but also in the private sector. So much valuable information, so much valuable experience to share.
Thank you. It was great being here. It was great talking to you. And again, thank you for helping me spread the message.
Thanks for listening to today's conversation. It's always a pleasure to step in for Peter when I can. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Employee Safety Podcast from Alert Media, the industry's most intuitive emergency communication and threat intelligence solution. To learn more about how to protect your people and business during critical events, visit alertmedia.com. Until next time.